All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to break down what is essentially the official operating manual for every single company in India, whether it's a tiny startup in a garage or a massive global corporation. We're talking about the Companies Act of 2013.
And that blueprint? It's India's Companies Act of 2013. And look, this isn't just some dusty, dense law book that lawyers argue about. It's the foundational guide that dictates how every single business, big or small, gets born, how it grows, and how it plays by the rules.
So here's the plan. We're going to start with the absolute basics, then literally walk through the entire life of a company, from its legal birth to how it gets funding, who's in charge, how it's held accountable, and finally, what happens when it's all over. Let's get into it.
First up, the Corporate Operating Manual. Before a company can even think about making a single rupee, it has to be defined by the law. And this act, it sets the stage and tells us who the players are.
So what's its big purpose? Well, the official jargon is to consolidate and amend the law, which basically just means creating one single rulebook that works for the entire country. And believe me, it is huge. We're talking 29 chapters that cover pretty much everything you can imagine in corporate life.
Right from the get-go, the Act basically gives you two main doors to walk through. A private company, think of it like a members-only club. You can't have more than 200 people in it, and you definitely can't go asking the general public for cash. But a public company? That's the complete opposite. It can go public, list on a stock exchange, and invite literally anyone to invest. And trust me, this one decision changes everything about how the company will operate.
All right, next up, we're looking at Chapter 2, which is all about incorporation. In simple terms, this is how a company is legally born and becomes its own separate person in the eyes of the law.
The first piece of the puzzle is the Memorandum of Association. You can think of this as the company's passport or its public constitution. It spells out the basics, its name, where it's based, what it's trying to do, and this is super important, whether its owners have limited liability. That's the legal shield that protects their personal stuff if the company gets into debt.
Okay, so if the memorandum is the public-facing passport, the Articles of Association are the company's private internal rulebook. This document gets into the nitty-gritty of how the company will actually run day to day. You know, how meetings are held, who gets to be a director, all that good stuff.
So, how is a company officially born? It all starts when you file those two big documents, the memorandum and the articles, along with a promise that you followed all the rules. The registrar of companies takes a look, and if they give the thumbs up, they issue a certificate of incorporation. And boom, in that exact moment, the company becomes a legal entity, totally separate from its founders.
Okay, so the company exists, it has a birth certificate, but now it needs fuel to actually go anywhere. And that fuel, of course, is money. Chapters 3 and 4 are all about the rulebook for how a company, especially a public one, can raise that cash.
And the main tool they use for this? It's called a prospectus. Really, it's just a fancy word for an official advertisement. It could be a simple notice, a big circular, basically any document that goes out to the public and says, hey, you should invest in us by buying our shares.
But this is where it gets really, really serious. I mean, you're asking strangers for their hard-earned money. So what happens if that invitation, that prospectus, is built on a foundation of lies?
This is exactly where the Act shows its teeth. If you lie to investors, you're not just looking at a slap on the wrist. We're talking potential criminal charges. The law creates both criminal and civil liability, which means it's not just a suggestion, to be honest. It's a legally enforceable command. And this is absolutely crucial for building trust in the entire market. So the company is born, it's got money in the bank. Now we need to figure out who's actually driving the bus. These next chapters lay out the entire governance structure, the people, the power, and the processes that make all the big decisions. The Act draws a really clear chain of command. Right at the very top, you have the shareholders. They're the owners. They're the ones who elect the board of directors, who you can think of as the company's brain trust, steering the ship and making the big strategic calls. The board then hires the pros, the key managerial personnel like the CEO and CFO, to manage the company day in and day out. It's a whole system of delegated authority from the top down. Okay, so you've got this whole structure for who's in charge. But how do you make sure the people with power are actually doing the right thing? This brings us to some of the most critical parts of the Act, the parts about transparency and keeping the whole system honest. The guiding principle here is to make sure everyone gets a true and fair view of the company's financial health. It's not enough to just let managers run things. You have to be able to see exactly how they're doing. So every company has to keep detailed accounts and publish financial statements. But here's the kicker. To make sure those numbers aren't cooked, Chapter 10 requires an independent audit. These auditors are like the public's watchdog. They're that crucial outside check and balance that verifies everything the company claims is actually true.
You know, just like the Act covers a company's birth and its entire life, it also has to deal with the end. What happens when things go really, really wrong? The Act lays out a pretty clear escalation path when a company is in trouble, and is all designed to protect people along the way. It might start with a formal investigation if there are whispers of fraud or bad management. If it turns out smaller shareholders are being treated unfairly, a special tribunal can step in to protect them. And if the company is just done beyond saving, Chapter 20 lays out the final, orderly process of winding up, making sure the assets are sold off and the debts are paid as fairly as possible.
And so we've come full circle. We started with that very formal, very simple line, an act to consolidate and amend the law relating to companies. But as we've seen, that simple sentence explodes into this incredibly detailed map that charts every single possible step in a company's life in India, right from the first spark of an idea all the way to its final goodbye.
So when you step back and look at it all, this act is way more than just a set of rules, right? It's this incredibly complex balancing act. On one side, it gives entrepreneurs the framework they need to build something amazing. But on the other, it puts up guardrails to protect everyone else, investors, the public, everyone. And I guess the real question it leaves us with is this. In the chaos of the real world, how well does this blueprint actually work at striking that perfect balance between letting business thrive and keeping it honest?